The Balrogs of Morgoth, roaming Arda like demons straight from hell. A comparison that is surprisingly close to the truth. And just like the demons we fear, a Balrog's only purpose was to spread fear and terror among the enemies of their only master, the Dark Vala Melkor Morgoth. Their fiery whips and swords drank the blood of countless elves and men. They were among the highest generals in Melkor's armies, leading his foul armies over the course of numerous battles and carrying out their master's dark will. But there was one among them who stood out, one whose darkness reached further than any of his kin, one whose notorious deeds would cause suffering unimaginable to most mortals. Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs and High Captain of the Iron Hell of Angband. Welcome back, Meldenjar, to this latest lesson. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of the next lesson, where we will look at what exactly happened to Sauron after the destruction of the One Ring. And for those who cannot wait until then, be sure to check our Patreon, where a few dollars allows you to get a say in what subjects we address and earlier access to the next video. However, this week we will ask ourselves, who was the Lord of all Balrogs, Gothmog? Like all other Balrogs, Gothmog was once counted among the ranks of the Maiar, angelic beings who existed before the world itself began, and who possessed immortality in addition to a number of supernatural abilities. Once, in the ages before the First War of Arda, the Balrogs were already spirits of fire. However, contrary to their kin, they felt themselves drawn towards the might and majesty of the first of all Valar, Melkor. Like moths to a flame, they came to him, forsaking their pasts and swearing their allegiance to him, becoming slaves of his will. He gave them more power and reshaped them with it, making them monstrous both inside and out. For he poisoned their souls with his malice so deeply, they could never have a chance of healing and returning from that darkness. For Melkor was the origin and wellspring of all evil in creation, and from among their ranks, one had been chosen to lead his master's legions into war as a supreme commander. His name roughly translates to dreaded oppressor, which describes him only too well: Gothmog. Just like the other Balrogs, Gothmog likely sided with Melkor very early on, possibly even before the creation of the world, and from then on he followed his master with every step. When the War of Powers erupted, before the first of the elves left the shores of Cuiviénen on the Great Journey, the Balrogs were already by their master's side, fighting loyally with him. However, when Melkor was defeated in a final desperate move, and the Valar and theirs destroyed Melkor's stronghold of Utumno, they failed to uncover the deepest halls and chambers. Many of the Balrogs perished in the War of the Valar and vanished from our lore, but some of them, including Gothmog, managed to flee into these undiscovered halls. And it was in here that the Balrogs awaited the return of their Dark Lord. And the Dark Lord Melkor Morgoth did return. When he escaped the bonds of the Valar and returned to Middle-earth, they gathered once more to him in his new fortress of Angband. Now it was that the name of Gothmog came to us. No, he was not his master's right hand, for that place had already been taken by another one, whom we all know only too well. Yet Gothmog was favored above all other Balrogs under Morgoth's command. He was made the High Captain of Angband and the supreme commander of several legions of orcs, trolls and other foul creatures. Where Sauron was Morgoth's lieutenant in more of a domestic role, Gothmog was Morgoth's lieutenant in the front lines of his wars against all. And in that capacity, he would enter the annals of the First Age. It was the bloodbath at the end of the second great battle for Beleriand, the Dagor Nuin Gileath. The great Feanor, king of the Noldor, in his arrogance and intoxicated by victory, had chased the fleeing orcs to within sight of Angband. Running ahead of his own armies, he found himself in the confines of Dor Daedaloth, surrounded by enemies, with only a few companions at his side. But it were not the orcs that ambushed the great king of the Noldor, but Balrogs, commanded by Gothmog himself. Feanor fought like only the greatest of the elf lords of the elder days could, but still Gothmog mortally wounded him, leaving him to burn to a crisp. For many centuries that followed, Gothmog faded from the annals. Melkor bided his time, holding back his forces primarily to hide his true power from the elves and men, waiting for the right time to overrun his enemies with an overwhelming force that brought death and ruin. But as the First Age waned, that would change. On a winter's night, the hollow peaks of Thangorodrim spewed forth fire and toxic fumes, and the gates of Angband were cast open, and Glaurung, the father of dragons, came forth, preceding the might of Morgoth's Angband. And immediately behind him, Gothmog and the other Balrogs led the main force. The green plains of Ardgalen were burnt, and the dark legions marched into Dorthonion, slaughtering elves and men, and turning the once thriving land into Taur Nu Fuin, the forest under Nightshade. After this devastating defeat for the Free Peoples, the supremacy of Morgoth was now unstoppable. Nevertheless, there were a rare few of them whose fighting spirit had not yet died down, and so the elves and humans prepared for a counterattack. This was to be the Nirnaeth Arnuidiad, the battle of the unnumbered tears. Gothmog had come and charged forth into the fray. With his fiery whip and his black axe, he cut into the ranks of the High Elves, shattering their soldiers where they stood, and slowly but unstoppably making his way to his target, until finally Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, stood in the way of the Lord of the Balrogs. Their fight was a mighty one to behold, but when Fingon's guards had been killed and another Balrog managed to tie him up with his whip, it was over for the High King. Gothmog's black axe came down and split the Elven King's head, and after his death, his corpse was beaten and trampled, and the maces of the other Balrogs turned his corpse and his banner to dust, adding another Elven King to Gothmog's list. The battle was lost for the Free Peoples, but it was not over yet. Húrin Talion, Lord of Dorlomion and head of the House of Hador, still resisted in the south against the host of Morgoth, forming the rear guard in order to let their allies escape. Enemy after enemy was slain by Húrin's great axe, until the sheer weight of their dead bodies buried him. Then Gothmog grabbed him and dragged the exhausted human lord to Angband, taunting him all the way. Only once more would Gothmog appear in our annals. Nigh 40 years later, Morgoth had finally succeeded in locating the hidden elven city of Gondolin. Immediately he sent out a huge army, led once more by Gothmog. The elves had thought themselves still shielded by secrecy when Morgoth's armies descended upon them. Gothmog, his other Balrogs and numerous dragons attacked the city, setting it alight and destroying it and its inhabitants in an inferno of flames and violence. Though the fall of Gondolin would be a great victory for Morgoth, that day would not bring just the fall of the city. For in the center of the city, on the very square of the king, Gothmog, lord of the Balrogs, faced Ecthelion, elf lord of Gondolin, lord of the fountains, and warden of the great gate. Despite suffering severe wounds, Ecthelion stood fast. His fight would end quickly, as Gothmog disarmed the elf and brought out his whip for the decisive blow. Armed with nothing but his bare fists, Ecthelion, in desperation, ran towards the Balrog lord, lunged at him, and rammed the point of his helm into the demon's abdomen. He lost his balance and fell into the water of the fountain together with the noble elf lord. There the fires of Gothmog were finally extinguished, and both he and Ecthelion met the agonizing death of drowning at the bottom of that well. Though Gothmog was indeed a Maya, he would still need power in order to recreate a new body for himself. And as he lacked that in his exhausted state, he would remain incorporeal, his spirit wandering the world as a disempowered shadow. And with that, he disappeared from legends and sagas. Thus we conclude this chapter and this video. Did the knowledge surprise you? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed it and would like to help us spread the stories of Arda to the wider world, then please take a look at our Patreon and consider joining the different ranks of our supporters and have your names appear on screen here, as well as getting early access to our future videos and other boons. But regardless of that, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of the next chapter in the Mysteries of Westerness, when we will answer a question that we have often heard. What happened to Sauron after the destruction of the One Ring? But for now, I have been Irjikor Kuruvane, and I wish you all Namarie Meldon Yar.